All right, welcome to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit Podcast. I am with a very special guest today. We have DJ EFN. DJ EFN is an American record label executive and DJ based in Miami who specializes in hip hop. Since the early 1990s, operating most often under the banner of Crazy Hood Productions, EFN has worked in the hip hop industry in a variety of capacities, including as a mixtape producer, album producer, and A&R consultant, radio host, marketing and promotion specialist, clothing retailer, artist manager, and film producer. In the fall of 2004, Boston's t.r.u.e magazine noted Crazy Hood Productions remains a pillar in Miami, as it has been noted for the better part of 10 years. DJ EFN also is the co-host of the very popular Drink Champs podcast, which I am a huge fan of. So, EFN, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, man.
Absolutely. So I'd love to hear tell me how you got your start just involved in hip hop.
Yeah, I loved music, all kinds of music growing up from really, really young. Um, what really got me into music was movies, like the soundtrack of movies and watching any movie, and then I would like act out a movie scene thinking of the music, or if I could get the song, I'd play it on the boombox and act it out. Like I was really just into music off of the movies, and then hip hop was just a part of my youth, music culture. It was the new music of the time. I'm I'm really young, like in the '80s, and hip hop is really starting to hit the radio waves, and it's just a part of the landscape of music that I'm listening to. It wasn't like the main music because I was listening to everything from thrash to punk to salsa to rock. Like, I mean, you name it. Like I was listening to it. If I liked it, I liked it. That's just the way I looked at things. As I got older, hip hop, it just like I gravitated towards it because I just felt, as much as I liked all these other genres of music, those other genres were older, and they were kind of like already spoken for in terms of a generation that it came from. And I felt that hip hop was my generation's music that we were building, and it was in its infancy. And in short, make a long story short, that's kind of like what inspired me to really just dive into hip hop and become like a complete hip hop head.
Right, right. And then tell me about what you brought to the Miami hip hop scene, because from what I had read, there wasn't, in this one interview that you did, you had said there was no consistent mixtape DJ in Miami. No one who ever
Right.
really played the music from Miami. So
Right. I
talk to
mean,
me a little about that.
we had, our scene was just, it was all over the place. But there had been people for, going probably, I would say, as far back as hip hop's beginning, there was people doing stuff in Miami. So I can never take the credit for that, or say that my generation in Miami was the one. But and then you had the Lukes and the Two Life Crews and this whole movement that they created, which was a huge national, international movement. But what happened in Miami that a lot of people don't understand is that movement became, it like splintered from like hip hop. Even though it's all hip hop, but this is gonna sound a little confusing, but it became the Miami-based scene. It was like this Miami-based music, and it separated itself in a sense locally from hip hop. And hip hop was looked at this like New York phenomenon happening in Miami that was like infiltrating, and a lot of like real local diehard Miami people were kind of against it and looked at it as so. I'm originally born in Los Angeles, but I was raised in Miami. So, I didn't see myself as a New York anything. So I was like, nah, like I just like hip hop, and I was into it. I liked Miami bass as well, but I was just really into lyrics and this boom bap sound that was heavy at the time. And I'm talking about like going into from late '80s, early '90s now, and I'm in high school. And then the first thing I started looking at as I look at the landscape of Miami hip hop is that there really wasn't organization, and there wasn't many people that were proud to say we are from Miami. There was a lot of New York transplants. There was a lot of people that, even if they weren't from New York, they kind of repped New York. And you'll see this actually, I've heard that this played out in a lot of different cities at that time, because New York was like the mecca of hip hop, and then maybe later LA, started popping in Atlanta. But a lot of people were like, oh, they were just kind of ashamed of being from Miami. So one of the things that my crew and myself did is we were just overly proud of Miami, and we were repping it. And this is before you have like the Rick Rosses and the Pit Bulls and all these guys, where it doesn't make sense to someone now looking at the way Miami looks now in terms of music and hip hop. But back then, people were ashamed of it, and we were just in front trying to, like, just repping the city, and that was our way of like changing the landscape.
Or was it clubs? Is that where that kind of you were able to kind of take that and sort of build that Miami hip hop scene?
Not really. I mean, look, so let me give you times wise. So let's just say 92, 93. I'm towards the last years of high school, and I want to get into music as a career and hip hop very specifically, and I want to make a difference in Miami. There isn't too many clubs in Miami playing hip hop. If there were, they were like these South Beach clubs that had like a hip hop room, and they wouldn't even let hip hop kids into them. So a lot of the hip hop parties that we went to were parties. They were house parties. They were like warehouse parties. They were like underground parties. So that wasn't a thing. And we did do that. That was one of the things I did. The first thing I ever did when I started my company is we threw a party, because it was very far and few in between that you had these jams where you could actually listen to hip hop, and all these hip hop kids from around the city would come through. Then radio wasn't a thing for hip hop out here either. They weren't playing commercial radio hip hop. So I got into pirate radio, which is big in Miami, underground radio. I started doing that, and then eventually I got to the mixtapes, and I also started managing groups that were proud to be from Miami, artists that were repping Miami, and that was another way that I was pushing, the envelope.
Right, right. It's kind of crazy to think, I mean, to see, Miami hip hop progress to, the SoundCloud sort of generation. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously that's based online, but, you had a lot of South Florida artists that
Yeah,
were kind of
huge.
bringing,
Yeah,
continuing to bring Miami to the scene, I guess.
yeah. For sure. Yeah, man. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud, if at all, to have a part of that. I'm sure a lot of younger artists would kind of say that my scene or my era has nothing to do with their era, but I will tell you this: it was a time in Miami where nobody wanted to rep the city. They didn't want to say they were from Miami. They were not proud. So I could tell you proudly that we helped change that. Myself and my crew.
Right. And tell me a little about the CHP marketing.
I've done. I did out of necessity, because really I was a kid that was like, oh man, I want to. First of all, I wish I could rap. I couldn't rap, so I wasn't gonna be a rapper. So I always wanted to be a DJ though, for sure. But the DJ road was gonna be longer for me, especially taking the mixtape route. So I'm developing artists. That's gonna take a while, but the dream is, I develop artists. They get signed to a major record label. We have a hit single. We're on Billboard charts, platinum hits. End of story. That's not realistic. I mean, we found that out quickly, especially, that's not a realistic, uh, like, basically lane that you're gonna go through. Luck. Some people are lucky and they have that happen to them, but that wasn't gonna happen. So I started to find all these different relatable things that I had a knack for to do to bring in revenue, while I funded these things that weren't bringing in revenue. um and that's why I started like the marketing company, and we had a clothing store, a hip hop clothing store, and I started consulting and doing all these different things. And really what it was is that we marketed so well for our own brand, and so cheaply on some like grassroots marketing, that people started stepping to me that had either record labels or they already had the accounts, and they're like, can you help us out? And they would hire us. And at one point I just had this juggernaut marketing company in Miami that had almost every record label account, and I had like Coca-Cola, Bacardi, and movie accounts at one point, and that's how that whole thing started.
Right. So it sounds like you really diversified kind of what you were
Had
doing
to,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
out of necessity for sure.
Right.
And what was dope about that is that it helped me learn all the different aspects of the industry. I didn't go to school for this. I didn't do any of that. I'm learning on the ground.
Right. That's actually one of the questions I was going to ask you is kind of like how, how in the hip hop industry, how you sort of networked and, eventually, and we're going to talk about Drink Champs in a minute,
Mhm.
but, you guys have gotten everyone on the show. I mean, like all of the
Right.
big artists. So I'm curious, like what have you found to be like kind of the key elements of sort of networking and building connections in the industry?
Well, for everybody, it's going to be different, obviously. And again, going back to it being like the early '90s, I'm setting out to build a career in the music industry and hip hop, but hip hop industry isn't in Miami. Even less in the part of Miami I'm in. I'm in deep in South Miami, an area called Kendall. Everybody that I told that I wanted to do this was like, "You're crazy. You don't have no connections. Like, how are you going to do this? You don't know anybody." So, luckily for me, these conventions started to make their way to Miami. These hip hop conventions, industry convention called How Can I Be Down was one of them, like sponsored by Def Jam and these different conventions. And I was like, well, here's my way of starting to be able to meet and network. And that's what I did. I started to go to all these conventions, and I would go with my crew. It would be like 10, 15 dudes, crazy hood shirts out, and I'd, we'd step to artists and step to people, and we were just like, this massive group of people that it couldn't be denied, like you couldn't ignore us, Black and Latino kids. And it's just like, yo, what's up, man? Like, and I was doing mixtapes at the time, and I had this portable studio that I had a 4-track, and I would plop it in a hotel lobby wherever the artists were staying, pull them in. If I see them walking to their room, hey, come here, I need you to do a freestyle for me. And that started to get exclusive freestyle, started to meet folks, started to shop demos at these things, just learning. And then people started to take notice. They were like, those dudes from Miami, like, it's like a freaking army of people, and they got mixtapes, and they're promoting, and they're doing this and they're doing that. And that's how I started to build my network of people. And then after that, it's what do you do with that network, which is I tried to always do good business with everybody that I dealt with and build a really solid reputation with whoever I came across.
So it sounds like you guys, I mean, it was a really creative sort of way that you guys built this thing up, as far as there wasn't,
Right.
sounds like there wasn't really a blueprint for it. You
No,
guys
there
just
wasn't.
hustled and
Yeah.
got the word out. So talk to me, starting Drink Champs, and then kind of building it into what it is today. Where did the original idea come from? And, how did you kind of connect with N.O.R.E?
So I'm gonna try to condense these really long stories for
Sure.
you. And the Drink Champ story is unique because it's two-pronged. There's the name Drink Champs, and that has its own story. And then there's us actually doing like a podcast
Tell me about
that
the
they
podcast part.
so we N.O.R.E moved down to Miami. So N.O.R.E and I, we've known each other forever. And it goes back to the whole thing of like the networking and people, and then me being a mixtape DJ, and labels and artists needing people like me, because in Miami, their commercial radio, like I said, wasn't playing hip hop. So the only people you could use to help promote records or break records was the pirate radio, underground radio DJs, and the mixtape DJs. And that was me. I did both. So I was important to these promoters and these artists and these labels. So I had my store. N.O.R.E was doing a promo run. He came to do an in store to promote his event. We met. He did freestyles for me. We hit it off. A friendship that's lasted years. I did his first show in Miami, like solo show, all this stuff. So fast forward, he ends up moving to Miami. Now it's around like 2006, 7, I don't know, give or take a year. Um, and he ends up at one point he's living in my neighborhood, my studio. He's like down the street from my studio. He starts working in my studio every day. And out of those sessions, a friend of ours or a friend of N.O.R.E's actually, that N.O.R.E introduced me to, he's the program director, and he has his own station on XM radio. His name is Leo G. He offers us, he's like, yo, you guys want a show on XM? This is before Sirius XM did the merger. So it's XM by itself. He's like, you guys want a show on here? So we did a weekly show on there out of my studio. And eventually we did it for 2 or 3 years, and it eventually was on Sirius XM. It was on multiple different channels on satellite radio. And you can Google that show. It was called Militainment Crazy Raw Radio, which N.O.R.E gave that crazy name to it. it looks and sounds like Drink Champs. We drank Tiger Bone. We got drunk. We introduced ourselves the same way. It was the same thing, minus we didn't have as many guests back then because we're like deep in South Miami area. So we stopped doing that show at one point. We weren't getting paid. We just did it for fun. N.O.R.E went on tour with Capone. They did a new CNN album. They went to Europe. I'm managing this group, Mayday, who signed to Tech Nine, Strange Music. We go on tour, so I'm busy with them. But I'm always trying to figure out how can we do something like that show. And I had a boy who's in like the podcast Hall of Fame. His name is Godfrey from Gamertag Radio. He's always advocating to me about podcasts. Like, yo, you should podcast. That show you and N.O.R.E were doing, it should be a podcast. Podcast wasn't a thing in hip hop at the time. It's considered some nerd thing. You know, like I brought it up to N.O.R.E a couple times. Like I was convinced. I was like, yeah, you know, I've seen the future and all this stuff for a long time. You know, going back to having the website for my company in like 94, crazyhood.com. So I tell N.O.R.E he's not really with it. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand the concept of the podcasting thing yet. Long story short, in terms of years, I don't know, maybe it took 3-4 years, finally gets convinced. My boy Godfrey is actually doing his podcast through CBS Radio. And he's like, you want me to make the intro? I said, yeah. And me and N.O.R.E end up doing the podcast through there. So that's the podcast story. The name, in those same old sessions where N.O.R.E's in my studio, me and my boys we were big drinkers. We're drinking all the time. If you got too drunk and you couldn't handle your liquor, you're not a drink champ. And that term was just something that was just a part of our regular vernacular. That's something we just would say all the time. And one day I was like, man, I really love the sound of that, drink champ or drink champs. And I was like, I wonder if anybody, like, I can't imagine that someone didn't already grab that for their .com or for social media. And to my surprise, nobody had trademarked it, copywritten it, gotten the .com. No, I grabbed all that shit. And this is like for sure 5 years before Drink Champ, like before me knowing what that's going to be. You know, I grabbed the name because I just loved the way it sounded. And eventually when N.O.R.E was ready to do the podcast, I said, look, man, I got Drink Champs here ready to go. This is a beautiful name. Let's just run with it. And he was like, all right, cool. And my boy Scam, who's done artwork for Eminem and Tribe Called Quest and all these people, he's from Miami. He's a homie of mine, done a lot of stuff for me. He did our logo, and the rest is history.
And I mean, you guys have interviewed, as I was saying, you know, everyone as far as, you know, people from Lil Wayne, Rick Ross, Nas, Floyd Mayweather, Mike Tyson. What have been your favorite interviews to do?
50 Cent is one of my favorites. Trick Daddy, one of my favorites. And let's just say, I mean, they all have something that make them favorite, but and Marlon Wayne is one of my favorites. I just couldn't stop laughing. The first Marlon Wayne. So those are like some of my favorites right there.
And you know, the one, I mean, that I absolutely loved the Lil Wayne interview that you guys did, as I was saying before we started recording. I'm curious, just how did that come about? As far as how are you, and not just Lil Wayne, I mean other artists, how are you able to get them? I mean, a 3-hour, you know, show. As we were talking about before we started recording, you know, Lil Wayne doesn't even do many interviews, let alone, you know, what he did with you guys. So how did that sort of come about?
And like I mentioned, I just think he was a fan of the show coming into it already, because from my understanding, I know he doesn't do many interviews, at least not up to that point. Now he's got his own show,
Right.
which I partially think is inspired by him feeling so comfortable at Drink Champs. Yeah, I just think he was a fan of the show. He, you know, after the episode was over, he pulled me to the side. He was telling me him and his girl watch us on Revolt all the time. So I think since he watches us all the time, he already had a relationship with N.O.R.E, and I had met him over the years. But my relationships are different than N.O.R.E's, because N.O.R.E is like an artist to artist. Mine was usually like some behind the scenes stuff, you know, where it's a different type of relationship. So he already knew N.O.R.E, but I think by watching the show, he felt like he already knew the entire show. Like he was already there because he'd watched it so much. He knew our little jokes. He knew, you know, how far we'll take something, the drinking, like he already knew what to expect. And he was just very comfortable, man. And that was a great interview. He was really cool, man. And it's just it all boils down to being comfortable, and then the liquor helps. And if you drink, and let me mind you, you don't have to drink to be on Drink Champs. We'll push and be like, hey, can you have a drink? But if you say I don't want to drink, we're not gonna like force you to drink. We'll do all the drinking for you. So if you have a couple drinks and you feel comfortable and you settle in your chair, the time goes by fast. Like I wouldn't even imagine that it was 3 hours that we did.
Right. And I mean, what you were saying as far as like, him having watched the show and kind of knowing the inside jokes and stuff. I mean, you could tell with that interview, it had such a great flow.
Yeah.
It was like there was never a dry moment, and so many funny jokes in that. I loved that interview. I'm curious also, I wanted to ask, like, as far as not just Lil Wayne, but just all of these, huge people in the hip hop industry that you've interviewed, what have you noticed kind of being in the presence of this greatness?
That's a good question. I mean, I can't tell you that. I'd love to tell you because I'm a big fan of the book. I might say it wrong because Think Rich, Grow Rich, I think is the name of the book.
Think and Grow Rich, yeah. Napoleon Hill, yeah.
And the way that he studied all these people and tried to figure out the traits. So I would love to be able to answer it in that way, like say, oh yeah, I've pinpointed all these traits. But the truth of the matter is everybody seems to be pretty unique. Now, the newer artists that we've talked to versus some of the older, there's a difference there. And that has to do a lot with just the landscape of the industry that they're in. The older artists are used to this record label structure that funded, that had big money back then, kind of pampered them in a sense, developed them and put them out, where newer artists, they, whether it be SoundCloud or whatever, and they're kind of self-made in a certain way, but they all have their pros and their cons the way I look at it. But there really isn't, I can't tell you there's one specific thing that they all have. For the most part, though, everybody is, they just have their unique personality trait that makes them who they are. And they wear it on their sleeves. It's sometimes to their detriment. Like a Dame Dash, or someone like that really just like his honesty is there. But that personality is why, it's Dame Dash, and DMX, same thing, like DMX is honest to his detriment. Like he's so honest with him, with the audience and how he puts himself out there. But again, that's a part of who they are, as this great artist.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it seems so the episodes are so raw, and you can tell like the authenticity of the artists. And as you mentioned, maybe the alcohol kind of, loosening up the inhibitions a little bit definitely can't hurt.
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. So building up Drink Champs to, definitely the biggest hip hop podcast.
Right.
And just, I mean, I know you said before the show, you don't consider yourself a journalist, right?
Right.
But it's like, as far as hip hop media, I mean, if I want to hear an artist interview, Drink Champs is usually like where I'm going to go. And I talk to friends, and it's the same thing.
Right.
So it seems like you guys have kind of built yourself up to the top. I'm just curious, where do you go from here?
I mean, I'll tell you this. Drink Champs, the way it seems sometimes on camera, the organized confusion and chaos is the way it is behind the scenes sometimes. I'd like to tell you like all these crazy grand plans. I mean, we have a lot of things that we want to do and plans, but sometimes it's that kind of like organized chaos that makes us special and we don't become stale, because it's just, we come out of left field sometimes with some crazy shit. But I think in terms of hip hop podcasts, we did the first type of multi-platform deal, which included the audio podcast, a digital subscription-based platform title, and then we had TV involved in that, linear, which is with Revolt. And I don't think that had been done, at least not in hip hop podcasting. So I would love to do something else again that breaks the mold in terms of what podcasters can do, and even more specifically within hip hop, because I want to help, and I want to help other artists create other streams of revenue for them, so they don't feel that they just have to do music. The one good thing about what I think we've done as Drink Champs is that we've helped. I want to choose my words carefully. I don't want to say revitalize, but to an extent, maybe we've re-inspired an older artist that kind of was like, losing, just I don't want to say losing hope, but they just felt like the industry wasn't for them anymore. What else could they do? And if you've noticed, after Drink Champs, a lot of artists are doing podcasts now, their own podcasts, which I would tell you, and I'm not going to name names, at least 80% of them, we were talking about doing our podcast network and having them all come through us. But push come to shove, we ended up not getting our podcast network off the ground. We were always shifting our deal structures with different people, so it didn't give us the foundation, to create our podcast. But nonetheless, I think that's dope that we helped create that lane for people, and I want to continue to create that lane for people, and I want to maybe even help, like, actually go in there and consult and cultivate different companies or artists or whatever to make this even larger for people.
Right. That's amazing. As far as you being an interviewer, what sort of what have you learned as far as kind of doing this show, talking to people? Like, what did you have inspiration from any other podcasters or interviewers in the industry, or were you just kind of doing your own thing?
To be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have. If you would have asked me, do I want to do this a couple years before Drink, I would have said no. Me personally, I was never trying to be in front of the camera. I was never trying to be that guy. But it's like everything else that I've had to do. It's like out of necessity to keep, because there was no one that was going to rep my brand better than myself. So, I created Drink Champs with N.O.R.E, and N.O.R.E is the driving force as far as the personality and even the conversation goes. But, I needed to be there at the table because this is something I created with him, but I didn't see that for myself. So every day, to be honest with you, I try to just maintain the idea that I love the culture. I'm a fan of the culture first and foremost. And if I can keep that mind frame, then I can still enjoy them. And sometimes I just sit at the table as a fan, listening like everybody else, and just happy to be there, man. Just happy because you would ask me as a child, as a teenager in 1992, hey, man, one day you're going to be doing this and sitting down with X, Y, and Z artists that you grew up on. I would have told you, get the fuck out of here,
That's
and
gotta be
here I
wild.
am. So I try to just stay focused on that and be grateful for the position I'm in and not take it for granted.
Right. Was there like a single artist who you were like the biggest like
Ice
you
Cube, man.
fan? You
Ice
just
Cube. Yeah, I
yeah.
was a huge NWA fan, and then Cube specifically out of NWA. So when he went solo, followed his career, and then he went off to do everything he's done in his career. And when we had him, he was one of the few artists that I've actually gotten like nervous and starstruck by. Like, oh
Yeah,
man,
that's what I was yeah,
fucking
yeah.
Ice Cube, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, for sure, for sure.
That's got to be the most incredible feeling, being able to just be in the presence, as you were saying, of like people you admired and listened to like growing up, and actually being able to
Yeah,
be face to face with them.
absolutely. Now the other takeaway though, on the flip side of that statement, is that the one thing that I do acknowledge is that all these artists are human, just like all of us, and so as much as I'm excited about it and I'm a fan of them, I like to be careful, and I tell people be careful about putting people on pedestals as well. Like you could be a fan without like losing yourself in that fandom, and understanding like, hey man, it's just another human being. You don't have to completely get nervous and oh man,
Hmm.
what is he gonna think of me? Like, nah, just he's a regular dude, and often and more than not, these people afterwards, we become friends and we're cool. And I mean, a lot of them I've known before Drink Champs, and they're just great people, man, behind the scenes.
Right. And I mean, you can tell, I feel like, Joe Rogan is another name that, that comes to mind along with you guys, where it's just,
Yeah, Joe's amazing.
Yeah, I love, I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, his style of interviewing was a big inspiration for me just starting the podcast because I wanted this raw, authentic, where I just made the guests feel comfortable and gave them platform to open up. But
yeah,
it seems like there is that where it's just one human speaking to another. It just feels like a conversation that you wouldn't otherwise get to hear unless there was a camera there.
absolutely. Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. Joe's done that. I mean, he's doing that with fucking. I saw who did I see? Oliver Stone yesterday. I was watching and
everyone.
Oliver Stone. Everybody's
Yeah,
and
Elon
it is.
Musk, like
Yeah, and he's talking to them like he's talking to one of his homies when he has his homies
exactly,
on,
exactly.
and we try to do the same thing with Drink Champs as well, but we're human, and even on the other is that you'll look at them and you'll be like, damn, like it's hard not to put somebody you grew up listening to or someone that's done has all these accolades on a pedestal, but I'm always trying to like keep them grounded, keep myself grounded. Like we got to understand the bigger picture here, but it's okay to celebrate their careers, and that's what it's more about. It's celebrating these careers and these accomplishments versus necessarily the person in front of you, the human.
Right, right. I think you guys, do an incredible job of that. I just want to, say this on camera that, I'm a huge fan of the show and your guys'
Thank you, man.
styles. So big props to you. I'm
Appreciate it.
so happy we got to have this conversation. I know you got to get going in a minute, but tell my listeners if people want to, get connected with Drink Champs. Probably not too hard to find online, but just whatever social medias you want to provide or other links, feel free
For
to
sure.
feel
So
free to plug.
the site, everybody check out, you can check out the archives of all of our episodes, drinkchamps.com. We just launched recently, which is funny, our official YouTube, because our videos were hosted with our different partners. So now we have our own YouTube, as well as it being on Revolt or our different partners. But you could check out youtube.com/drinkchamps and at drinkchamps of all the social media. And then my company also crazyhood.com. Check that out at DJ EFN on Twitter, at Who's Crazy on Instagram. And I have a film series that I'm doing called Coming Home. It's a documentary series where I travel to different countries and explore the country through hip hop, through their culture, hip hop culture. And you can check those out at crazyhood.com/film.
Interesting. That sounds super cool.
Yeah, man.
Awesome. Well, and if you guys enjoyed the show today, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Roscoe's Wetsuit. And you can also find Roscoe's Wetsuit podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio right now.
Dope.
Um, DJ EFN, again, it was a huge honor getting to talk to you, man.
No, my G, thank
Appreciate
you
it.
very much. Appreciate it.